Thank you so much, Dr. West, Dr. Mahdavi, for taking the time to talk to VOA. It's a great honor to have you both back on the show. So I would like to first start asking you, Dr. West, your name is on the ballots in different states with different affiliations. Would you tell us how many states allowed you to have your name on the ballot and why others didn't?
Well, we've got 16 states where we have direct ballot access. We have 24 states where we have write-in access, and that still required petitions and signatures. So that required a lot of work on behalf of magnificent volunteers, as you can imagine. But it was very difficult, and the Democratic Party spent millions and millions of dollars to try to keep us off. As you know, we went to the Supreme Court all the way and lost in Pennsylvania, went state Supreme Court in Georgia, and we lost. We won in Michigan, and we lost in Arizona. So there's been a tremendous struggle, but we come up swinging. We still swinging with smiles on our faces, brother. We bearing witness to truth, justice, and love, and we might be living in a decaying and declining American empire, but we want to make sure that the best of America, that's Martin Luther King Jr. and Fannie Lou Hamer, Rabbi Heschel and Edward Said and Dorothy Day, and a whole host of cloud of witnesses. We want to keep their memory alive, especially for the younger generation, given these dark times, these grim and very dim days in which we live.
So you mentioned that because initially, as you suggested, you were supposed to be on a ballot on 18 states, but Pennsylvania didn't work for you, and also you mentioned the situation with Georgia. Could you briefly tell us what was it like to go and get involved with this, Supreme Court, court cases, and how costly they are, how time consuming they are for an independent candidate like yours?
Well, that's part and parcel of the obstacles and impediments of running as an independent candidate. That I was actually just in the courtroom via Zoom at the federal court in Pittsburgh, bearing witness and giving reasons as to why we were using the 14th Amendment, which is the Equal Protection Clause, to make sure that all voices and parties had an equal protection. But you can imagine that to have that kind of priority rather than to hit the road and try to campaign. And of course, we raised $1.2 million for the whole campaign. Democrats raised $1 billion in just a few months, and Republicans raised about $750 million in a few months. So we are very, we might run out of cash, but we never run out of gas. That's Annahita and I tell each other that all the time, and that makes a difference, my brother.
Yes. Would you briefly tell us that because you ran as a candidate from the People's Party and then decided to go with the Green Party and then as an independent for Justice for All Party. Could you tell us what happened that you changed all these parties during this time?
Well, I knew immediately I couldn't stay with the People's Party, though. It had too many challenges, and they had one state down in Florida as the access to the ballot, and I was really quite delighted to move to the Green Party. But then I discovered, you work with people up front, and I just saw too much dishonesty and disrespect. I'm a free Black man. I speak very openly about the Black freedom struggle and its relation to predatory capitalist processes and imperial policies abroad. They do too, but they've never made Black freedom a central issue and theme in their party platform or in their party practices. And so there's a lot of good people in the party, of course, but I clash with the leadership, and it's been wonderful. I've been independent. We formed our own party, Justice for All. We've got a number of different branches now, Justice for All, throughout the country. And most importantly, we're just free to tell the truth and seek justice and try to be self-critical. We don't want to be self-righteous about this, but it's still very much about love, compassion, solidarity. That's why we made the connection between the barbaric genocide in Gaza on the one hand and the cop cities, 86 attempts now to create cop cities in the United States, the militarism that spills over across national boundaries.
Dr. West, before I move to ask a couple of questions from Dr. Mahdavi. There were some polls suggesting that you lead among third-party candidates. Do you think you could spoil the election, specifically because you mentioned Michigan, and there are other battleground states that you are on the ballots? I know you received this question from many people, but this is a very significant moment, and just we are a few hours remaining to the election night. Are you concerned about this, or you think you see yourself as a disruptor?
Well, I don't see myself in any way as a spoiler because the vast majority of persons who I have talked to who plan to vote for me would never, ever, ever vote for either the multicultural militarist Kamala Harris or the neo-fascist gangster Trump. So that we're talking about the 85 million fellow citizens who would never vote for either party, and many of them stay at home. So the idea that somehow those who vote for me would automatically vote for Harris is simply false. It's a lie. Trump spreads that lie, Harris spreads that lie, but I'm used to both parties lying. Now, I think Republicans tend to lie more than Democrats, but Democrats have their set of lies and crimes, just like Republicans have their set of lies and crimes. And we're concerned about truth and justice. That's all, though, brother.
Yeah. So, Dr. Mahdavi, thank you so much to take the time and be with us. Could you tell us if you want to add something about what we discussed, and also have a specific question? What was it like for you to travel with your husband across the country to talk to people?
Well, I stopped traveling a few months ago because of the financial campaign's finances. But I did travel with him to a few states. We started in Mississippi. I've never been in Mississippi. The most beautiful people that I've, seen in warmth and love. What has always stood for me and the memories that I have are that love that generates within the community, especially Black community and other communities that comes to Cornel, and the love that Cornel gives them, and how much they love him and they look up to him, and they literally tell him that, you are and have always been the voice and the fighter for our community. So seeing the people, seeing the communities, witnessing that love and the hope has been the best thing. And I will always carry it in my heart. But of course, it can get tiresome, travels, jet lags. But again, I'm happy that I did it as much as I could, and until we were not able to financially, and the campaign wasn't able to financially support it. But yeah, it's a beautiful thing to see that hope that runs like a river in the communities, and no matter what the politics and politicians are, it will always stay that way.
Has your perspective of America changed the idea of a democracy? It's just what we discussed with Cornel momentarily.
I never had the perspective that America is a full democracy. I grew up with a father that was very conscious politically and socially and for social justice. So I knew America's history from the genocide of indigenous people, the enslavement of Black people, then the horrible institutional racism. And then, of course, I came here in 1990, and shortly after Rodney King happened. So I have also lived in these, these uproars and interruptions of society. And then, of course, the latest, not that it was the last, but the latest social, or that was pretty nationalized on especially mainstream TV with George Floyd. So I never necessarily thought that America is a vast democracy, especially with two-party system. I have always had a hard time voting whether for a Democrat or Republican, but it is true to say that my eyes have been open to many things that otherwise I wouldn't know if I wasn't in the campaign. how Democrats and Republicans, in our case, mostly Democratic Party, worked so hard to block Cornel to be on the ballots. So I believe that the Republicans and Democrats lie the same. I believe they are the same corrupt machines. And for them to go on the stage, rallies, and say, we don't lie, we don't cheat, is actually a lie. Millions of dollars that they spent to be able to block Cornel to get on the ballot, that's not democracy. Not only Cornel, the other third party candidates that you also mentioned, that's not democracy. I mean, to keep the two-party system and also to shame people about not voting for them, it is not a democracy. And so, yes, the things that I know now, I didn't know before. Not that I thought America is a vast democracy, but now I know that this is absolutely an undemocratic political machine. That doesn't mean that we have the same undemocratic society as, let's say, Iran or Russia or other countries, but I think it's an illusion and a delusion to think that America is a vast democracy when it comes to politics.
Yeah, before I move to foreign policy, I want to ask a personal question. How often does Cornel ask for your advice on politics?
Beautiful question.
He always, I mean, during this campaign, every decision he wanted to make, he did talk to me about it, and he talked to his brother also, because his brother is pretty much his consultant in majority of his areas in his life. But he did consult with us. He did tell us his ideas and what he wants to do, and it doesn't necessarily mean that he did what we said. He does what he believes, but it also doesn't mean that he didn't do what we said. There were times that maybe he changed his mind about maybe things here and there. But, you know, I've always looked at him as this legend and icon before he was my husband. And I do trust his decisions, and I do trust him, and he has an amazing, strong faith. And, you know, I stand by him, even if at points I don't agree with him, which is very little, but, you know, I stand by him. This was a part of his calling. So the story is that I wasn't really for him to run when he told me, right? I didn't want to. I never looked at him as a politician, but he's not a politician, and he proved it to me and many other people. He's not a politician, but he did convince me when he said, this is a part of the past 50 years of my calling. And I do believe he has a prophecy, and I was not going to argue with that. And I do believe that the past 17 months, he has shaken the society by the messages that he sent to the political system, that what could be and what do we deserve, what America deserves.
So, Dr. West, so you ask for advice, but you don't listen?
No.
No, he does.
No, you see, I'm a jazz man, so I listen to all those things that make my song better, and I don't listen to some of the things that might not make my song better.
That's basically what I wanted to say. Yeah,
that's
exactly.
a lovely question, though.
Exactly.
That's the highlight of the interview. Yeah, amazing. Yeah. So let me change gear and go to foreign policy, which is the area our viewers are very interested. How different will your policy be, Dr. West, comparing to what we hear from Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump?
Well, one, you know, when Martin Luther King said militarism, racism, poverty, and materialism are the four forces that are sucking the democratic energy out of the American social experiment, I take very seriously his critique of militarism. I see that as a criticism of American foreign policies in which we are so eager to create these lethal armed forces rather than engage in wise diplomatic processes. And so there would be no genocide. I would have had an embargo on any kind of military or financial support of Israel, as it was very clear that they were laying bare this kind of massive massacre on innocent people, especially innocent children and women and men. The same would be true in terms of being able to bring an end to the war in Ukraine. Same would be true in terms of trying to be more diplomatic with China. I see Kamala Harris as a militarist, black woman militarist. That is to say, she's willing to not just provoke, but to push Putin. And I think Putin himself is still very much a gangster and a war criminal in his own way, but he has a right, Russia has a right to security. And the same with China. It's too much provocation. And I think that moves us toward World War III in the same way that Trump moves us towards Civil War II at home. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to provide some kind of alternative to Trump and Biden. And then when Biden had his LBJ moment, something that we talked about many, many months ago, we just predicted that Harris now was following through on the same militarism in Gaza. And of course, genocide, the crime of genocide is a litmus test of morality of any nation, any country. And if you deny it, if you enable it, it's a sign that you don't have a moral fiber in your military policy. Now, we know military policies always go far beyond morality, but you have to have some moral dimension there. And if you don't, then I think Martin King was right. You will find yourself sliding down a slippery slope to chaos, to more injustice, and with the United States being the major superpower, the most powerful empire in some ways in history of the species, that we're going to reap what we're so chickens will come home to roost, and that's very much what we're wrestling with right now.
Would you like to add anything, Dr. Mahdavi? And next question I have is about the Iran. If you would like to give us more in detail your position on Iran and how you see the situation versus the government in Iran, whether you still support the coming in support of Iranian people when it comes to the human rights, and how you see the U.S. foreign policy towards the Islamic Republic.
Well, one thing is that I will never stop my support for the Iranian people and their human rights. That's my priority when it comes to Iran. I think you asked me this question a couple of years ago when I was on your show, and I did say that I don't see a major differences between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party's foreign policies. It's usually, maybe they bring their characteristics, each president and their administration brings their own characteristics and the operational differences, but I don't think they'd have fundamental changes. As we see that the wars continue, it's like giving the torch to the next president and continuation of wars. So I don't necessarily think that Republican Party or Democratic Party, they have the Iranian people's human rights and well-being on their list. I believe that for them is the price of gas, it's war, weapons, money, and control. So I will never stop supporting Iranian people's human rights. As someone that is an Iranian American living in diaspora, of course, I believe that I will follow their lead. I am not going to give permission to myself to say what is good for them or not, but I also will not stop talking about how they are under oppression, the movements that we see, the arrests, the uprisings in Iran, from all the student movements that we saw to green movement to women life freedom movement, the recent movements, incidents that we see. So it's an interesting thing for an Iranian in my position to be supportive of Iranian people's human rights and speak the truth about the oppressions of Islamic Republic of Iran against Iranian people. And then at the same time be against the genocide that is happening in Palestine. It's a very, it's a very interesting position, because when I speak for Iranians' human rights, you're called one name. When you speak for Palestinians' human rights, you're called one name. But this is who we are. And Cornel, for the past 50 years, has been talking about truth, justice, and love, has been talking about the sufferings of the people, has been saying that an Iranian child and a Palestinian child and an Israeli child, American child have the same values. He was there for the support of the movements for Iranian Baha'is decades ago. And so I hope that our people, Iranian people, can remember how one of the most renowned poets that we had, Hafiz, I think it was Hafiz, that said that famous poem that, Bani Adam Azai Yekdigaran, remember that is such a famous piece of poetry. Sadi Shirazi, right? Yeah, Sadi Shirazi, that said, we're all, the same limbs of a one body, and if there's pain in one limb, the other limbs cannot be at rest. And if you cannot talk about the sufferings of all human beings, that maybe your name should not be a human. So I think that's always going to be me. Of course, my Iranian people, the country that I was born and raised in, their human rights is always going to be at the center of my, my advocacy. But that doesn't mean that I am going to stop talking about the other people's suffering. That's actually one of the things that we were in conflict in the Green Party. We were advised not to talk about Russia or China or Iran, which was pretty hard to hear.
Oh, that's amazing. Dr. West, do you want to say something about that, the restriction that you faced? And also, the question is, Vice President Harris called Islamic Republic of Iran a major threat to the United States. And at the same time, former President Trump recently in an interview, he said that we are not in the business of regime change, and we already have so much to deal in our own country. And the only thing he doesn't want is that Iran to obtain nuclear weapon. So what's your position when you see these two parties defining their policies toward Iran?
Yeah, it just strikes me that, what Annahita was saying was one must never allow strategic and tactical thinking to completely downplay the morality of one's policy. So there has to be a moral consistency that looks at the world from the vantage point of people who are being dominated and who are being oppressed. So when you look in Gaza and you see genocide, that's domination and oppressed. When you look at the woman life freedom movement in Iran, they're being dominated and oppressed. When you look at Muslims in China, you look at Kashmirians, you can look at a variety of people all around the world. You keep track of those who are dominated and oppressed. Now, we understand that strategic and tactical thinking has its place. I remember speaking to Nelson Mandela. We had fascinating conversations about the Soviet Union supporting the Black freedom movement in South Africa. And that was a beautiful thing. But even as the Soviet Union was doing that, you still had to reserve the right to criticize the ways in which domination and oppression taking place in the Soviet Union. I think that support of Palestinians is a beautiful thing, wherever it comes. Palestinian brothers and sisters feel as if they're in the world all by themselves. They need solidarity. There's no doubt about that. But when, in fact, let's say if Iran is a major supporter of the Palestinians, that does not mean that various forms of domination in Iran ought to be overlooked, even as they provide certain kinds of support for people whose back is against the wall. Truth as Herman Melville said, has ragged edges. It cuts in a variety of different ways. And if you're committed to truth and you're committed to justice, and Brother Martin said, what injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And that's true for China, Russia. It's true for the United States. It's true for Brazil. It's true for Hungary. It's true for Sudan. It's true for the Congo. It's true for Haiti. It's across the board. And of course, again, I want to be very explicit about this, that I speak as a Christian. And I speak as a Christian that comes out of a great black people who ourselves have been so hated and terrorized and traumatized that when we talk about love in the face of hatred and freedom in the face of terror and wounded healing in the face of trauma, then we're talking about something that's issues of life and death. And so moral consistency is something that makes all the difference in the world. And that's what pits me over against State departments, Pentagons, political parties, ideological organizations, and so forth.
Dr. West, you said a very important thing that the support that Palestinians, some factions of Palestinians political parties are receiving from Tehran, from the government in Iran, it's very complicated to digest, because I was in West Bank right after the October 7 attack, and I spoke to many people, politicians and average people on the street of West Bank, and most of them are extremely disturbed by the support of the government in Iran for the militant in West Bank and also in Gaza. They don't think that the government in Iran has as it was mentioned, that good intention of Palestinians in their heart. So they think that the government is, because of the rivalry they have with Israel, they're using Palestinians for this animosity. And also you see now the same thing in Lebanon. So many people in Lebanon, after this horrible situation in Beirut, they are coming and saying enough is enough. I mean, Hezbollah is not serving our national interest, and we don't want the government in Iran to keep supporting and sending all these weaponaries into our region. So my question is, when you mentioned that these morality aspects of your vision, your doctrine and your policy, how do you see this? I mean, because most people, I don't think in American politics get into this much of the details of these policies and how you can define a national policy that could serve the national interests of the United States. At the same time, it could have those aspects that you already mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm glad you raised the issue because it is a very complicated one. You know, Malcolm X used to say, I'm for truth no matter who's for it, and justice no matter who supports it. People can actually support just movements for motivations that themselves are highly suspicious. That when the French supported the American revolutionaries, when Lafayette came to the United States, it was partly because the French were over against the British in Europe. They didn't have a whole lot of solidarity with these colonists responding against the British Empire. I mentioned the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union supported the freedom struggles in Africa, it wasn't always because they just love Africans so much. It was anti-United States. They had a Cold War going on, and their policies were strategic and tactical in that way. Same would be true with Iran vis-a-vis Palestinians. So I think we have to be very truthful about the ways in which the motives might not always be attractive. But when you're a people like Palestinians this moment whose backs are against the wall, they need help from anybody. And it's very important that people highlight their plight so that their babies are not crushed. But that doesn't mean that those who are supporting them always have the right motives. And therefore, we can still be critical of what those motives are. But I'm very much supporting, I'm glad that anybody supports South Africans against apartheid and Palestinians against genocide and so forth. But see, I would say the same thing about the woman life freedom movement. My God, if they could get support from all around the world, that's a beautiful thing too. They're dealing with forms of unbelievable and unjustifiable oppression and domination, and all the sugarcoating of it and sanitizing of it, for me, needs to be radically called into question. And it means then that one finds oneself unable to rest at ease in any geopolitical camp, because moral consistency means you're cutting against their grains across the board. And that's precisely what it means to be a follower of Jesus, a follower of Martin Luther King Jr. and Fannie Lou Hamer, and most importantly, trying to hold on to some integrity, honesty, decency, and commitment to truth and justice.
Dr. Mahdavi, you want to say something?
Oh, no, I agree with everything that he said. And I just do not see any issue with standing up for anyone in any corner of the world that is under oppression. It has nothing to do with, for me, it has nothing to do that you're from the left or right or center. If a human being is suffering in the world, one is one too many. And if we can voice their pains and we can create platform and awareness for them, and we are called different names, so be it. So yes, I am not going to stop talking about the horrible things that are happening to Palestinian people. I'm not going to talk about the oppression that Iranian people have had for the past 40 years, or any other community, the Black community here, the brown community here. I think as human beings, we have some ethical and moral responsibilities to be able to speak about each other's pain and be there for each other. That's why, we are not politicians. He is not a politician because he refused to accept the strategic talking points that he was advised. And one of the reasons that he said, I am going to be independent. My hope is that we do see one day, it kind of maybe it's just cliche, but no, one can always hope that one day we see a world that it is there, the growth, human morality has grown to a place that everybody cares for everybody's well-being, regardless of where they are from, what color they have, and so on and so forth.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Quickly, before I ask the last question, just want to mention that I'm sure you know better than me, better than many people, who there is also a concern of rising anti-Semitism currently in America and also across the world, especially after the October 7th attack and the response of the Israeli government. So that concern, it's caused some Jewish voters, which probably you have met them in Pennsylvania or other states, to struggle whether they're going to support the Democratic tickets or how they're going to vote. So those are real people I've met, and I've heard their concerns. I would like to conclude this interview if you would like to add, Dr. West, anything about this. And the last question I have is, this interview will be watched by many people across the world because we're sharing this internally with other services in VOA. So maybe tens of millions of people, hundreds of million people will watch this interview. What do you want the world to know about America?
Well, first, your point about anti-Jewish hatred and anti-Jewish sentiment, of course, that's just as wrong as anti-Palestinian hatred, anti-Palestinian sentiment, or anti-Arab, or anti-Muslim hatred, anti-Black hatred. We have to be morally consistent here. But what we have to recognize is that even when people are hated and terrorized and traumatized, Jews have had to deal with that for 2,500 years. As human beings, they can still choose to traumatize others. They can still choose to terrorize others. They can still choose to hate others, just like as a Black man. Black people can choose to hate others, even though we've been hated. We can choose to terrorize others. That's not a moral choice. Moral consistency has to hold across the board. And America is the 68th empire in the history of the species. And empires come and go, and empires usually begin to go when there's military overreach, when there's corruption of elites, when there's impotence among the citizenry, and when those citizens inside of the empire have less and less access to the best of what has gone into the making of that empire. And that's why my campaign was a moment in a movement. It was an attempt to reintroduce America to the best of itself. Here's Martin Luther King Jr. and the Black Freedom Struggle. Here's Edward Said and the Palestine. Here's Dorothy Day, who's a vanilla white sister, Catholic. Here's Rabbi Heschel, who's Jewish. Here's Stephen Sondheim. Here's Louis Armstrong. Here's John Coltrane. We can go on and on and on. The best of America, more and more being pushed to the periphery, pushed to the margins. And both Harris and Trump pushing into the margins. Though in the end, I should say that, if I had just one vote and the only vote that would determine the election, and I had to choose between the raw fascism of Trump and the war criminality of Harris, that I would choose Harris. Because I think in the end, Trump is worse. But in the end, I want people to have taken seriously what we tried to do in our campaign. And if you're in those non-swing states, vote for West, vote for West, vote for West. But that's about over now. The election is over now. And what we tried to do was provide some alternative to those truncated options.
Well, amazing. Dr. Mahdavi, what do you want the world to know about America at this moment? There are millions of people who will watch this interview and still see America as a beacon of hope, and they struggle in their country, whether in Iran or China or in Russia or any other part of the world.
I want to also say that if I had a choice between Trump and Harris, and that was the only choice that I had, I would sit down and sit out. I would not vote for either of them. But, well, I think that it depends on which country and which nation you are in when you look at America as a beacon of hope, right? So for many people that can't criticize the government, and if they say anything against the government, they are going to end up in jail and executions or persecutions. There are elements in America that, as a democracy, that doesn't exist in other countries. So I can understand that, some opportunities that exist for maybe women and other minorities. I can understand the perceptions based on what their lived experience is, right? I'm not going to dismiss that. So if somebody in Iran tells me, and I talk to people all the time from inside of Iran, that they have young daughters, and they are young women, and they don't know if there is a good prospect for them, or even men and jobs and universities, finances, and all of that. And they think that coming to America gives them an opportunity. I can understand those perceptions. But I look at America not just as domestic policies, but also foreign policies. And while I personally am grateful for the opportunities I received in America to be where I am, but America's foreign policies are very harmful to the world. I would never believe and be convinced that America has the well-being of Iranian people in its heart, or well-being of Palestinians in his heart, or any other nation. I believe that foreign policy of America is pretty much centered over control and power as an empire. So, I cannot have a general statement, but I can understand that each person from their lived experiences might look at this country and have different perceptions of it. I don't know, what do you want to say about America?
No, I agree. I agree. But I can tell you one thing, that we are so blessed to always be in conversation with a high quality brother like you. I can tell you that. And Voice for America is profoundly blessed to have you working with them and for them.
Thank you so much, Dr. West, Dr. Mahdavi. I appreciate the opportunity. It's always a pleasure to have this opportunity to talk to you. Godspeed. Best of luck the last few hours of this campaign. I know you worked so hard. You traveled across the country, and hopefully you created a movement that you were looking for, and maybe we take it from there. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, my dear brother.
Thank you.